I'm Lisa Chapman. I'm the Director of Public Policy with Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. And I am joined by our Executive Director, Eric Huffnagel. And we have a special guest today, Amanda Carlisle from our partners at Washtenaw Housing Alliance, who's going to talk about some amazing work they did and are doing. Thank you, Amy. Amy Stevenson, our comms manager, who's helping do this slideshow today. I had a lot of trouble getting on, so I'm so happy to be here. Happy June. So Eric's going to be running through some federal updates. I'll take us through some state updates and kind of little announcements that we have, and then we want to hear from you about what's going on around your community. And closing out with kind of some things that you can take action with. At least as we know it this month, there'll probably be some more as we go along, but we have a lot in store for you. So let's get into it. So yes, Amy is wonderful about following up. If you don't catch all the links and everything in the chat, we will be emailing those out to you after the meeting, and you should be getting them in your inbox pretty shortly, so you can just relax and listen. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Carlisle. What a lovely picture.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Is it okay if I start sharing my screen, Lisa? Yep. Okay. So hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Carlisle. I am the Executive Director of the Washtenaw Housing Alliance. And the Housing Alliance mission is to end homelessness in Washtenaw County. We are a coalition, umbrella organization of about 25 nonprofit and government entities providing services and housing to people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless in Washtenaw County, similar to kind of MICA, but on kind of a countywide scale. Our focus areas are really around coordinating our homeless system of care, ensuring providers are most effective, efficient, and collaborative by providing training and technical assistance, advocating for resources and effective policymaking, which I'll talk about today, and also kind of sharing data, stories, and systems work to build the public and political will to end homelessness and expand affordable housing options in Washtenaw County. So I wanted to share a little bit about today is about a bus tour that we hosted in March 2023 this year. And what led us to host a bus tour were a number of different things. One was that we had new elected officials as of November 2022. And with these elected officials, we thought, certainly some education around the homeless system of care and what was happening in the homeless system of care would be really worthwhile. And then also there had been sort of a couple of years of what I will term bad decisions around local funding and the system of care, sort of coupled with other factors like the end of COVID emergency rental assistance. We were seeing the rise in the number of families experiencing homelessness, and in general, kind of a 30% increase in shelter demand, and just a lot of different things that were happening in our community. And so we had talked with our local service providers and our network and really felt like education and advocacy were really needed with our elected officials. So the purposes of goals kind of the tour were really to educate elected officials about the homeless system of care. We said we wanted to talk about structure, programs, successes, challenges, funding gaps, really leaning into what wasn't working in our system of care and where resources were really needed. And then also doing advocacy for those resources to really expand effective programs and services and policies that expand tenant protections, make it easier to develop affordable housing, and are supportive of best practices within the homeless system of care. So these were kind of the goals that we had outlined as a network of providers. So we invited our elected officials from the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners, the Ann Arbor City Council, and the Ypsilanti City Council. We also went back and forth about should we open it up more broadly to other elected officials in the community, and what we decided was we wanted to keep this tour manageable, personal, and, really have the time and, resources to dedicate towards this. So right now, that was kind of, in March, this is who we opened it up for. And right now we're talking about doing another tour for elected officials, maybe funders, continuum of care board members, others in the community who really might see the value in kind of seeing shelters, seeing supportive housing sites and whatnot. So we ended up having 7 elected officials join us, 4 from the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners, 2 from the City of Ypsilanti City Council, and 1 from the Ann Arbor City Council. The Ann Arbor City Council had also had a tour separately of some of the similar sites. So some of them elected not to attend this tour, and some of them also said it didn't work out well, the timing, but they would like to attend another tour in the future. So we're working on doing another tour. This is the first stop, a picture of the first stop that we made at the Robert J. Delanis Center, our largest emergency shelter for single adults. And Dan Kelly is there on the right-hand side. He's a MICA board member, I believe, still, and he is the executive director of the shelter, and was providing kind of details here, an initial introduction, and then we did sort of a tour of the site. And pictured here, I'm in the back, as well as there's one other service provider, and then the rest are elected officials who were joining us that day. So I thought it would be helpful to maybe provide some information about the logistics of how we planned the event, and so that could be something that others across the state of Michigan might be interested in planning or doing, and can see how we managed this. So the tour started at a site, and then we kind of looped and went back to that site at the end. We spent a half day. This helped keep our costs pretty low, which I'll share on the next slide for you, because we didn't have to serve lunch, but we did provide kind of snacks and, waters and everything as we were going through the tour. But keeping it to a half day also allowed everybody to stay engaged. And, it was really jam packed. And I don't think we could have done much more. A full day kind of would have been, I think, a little bit too much for everyone to kind of take in all the information that they were observing, seeing, hearing. So we started, we went first to the Robert J. Delanis Center, talked about emergency shelter and non-residential services for individuals. Second stop, we went to a supportive housing site and talked about supportive housing for individuals and people with disabilities. It was also a site owned and operated by our public housing authority, Ann Arbor Housing Commission. So there we also were able to talk a little bit about the difference between project-based vouchers, which this site had, versus tenant-based vouchers, which our public housing authority manages. And we also talked about kind of the relationship between property management and services. This site is owned and operated by our public housing authority, but services are provided by a permanent supportive housing provider, Avalon Housing. Next, we hopped on the bus and did kind of just a drive-by of a few properties in Ann Arbor that are owned and operated by Avalon Housing, our largest supportive housing provider, and really got a chance to show them. Avalon has a really wide range of variations in their supportive housing, anything from a single family home that is, divided into a few units to kind of a newer build that we got to show them. A family site, an individual site, and really just for them to see that a lot of the supportive housing in our community is embedded within the community and part of the community, and not a separate site that's kind of on the outskirts of town or something, that these are really tenants and residents of the community. Then we went to our third site, where we talked about family shelter, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing for families. On kind of that first slide where I showed you just kind of some of the highlights from some of the news articles recently, one thing that we have seen in Washtenaw County is just this real quick rise in family homelessness over the last 7 or 8 months now. And so we wanted to take some time to really talk about what was going on in our system of care, how we were responding, but also where the gaps were in our system of care. And so, and it's also hard to show rapid rehousing in action. And so what we did was we selected a site that was owned and managed by our Public Housing Authority, again, Ann Arbor Housing Commission, but it's a mixed site of affordable housing as well as supportive housing units. About a quarter of the units are supportive housing. And some of the residents were previously rapid rehousing tenants or participants. And so we were trying to make the linkage between kind of shelter, rapid rehousing, and then kind of how folks move on from rapid rehousing. Some may need supportive housing, some may take on their own housing, in the private landlord setting, but we wanted to kind of show it. And they had a wonderful, beautiful community center that we were able to gather a number of different agencies where you can see speakers on this side. This is the different agencies that were represented during these discussions. So it was a great way to kind of talk about the model of rapid rehousing, talk about family shelter, but kind of see a community center where people were receiving supportive housing or just affordable housing. And then our last site, we wanted to make sure we had good geographic distribution of kind of programs and showing, folks things that were happening in Ann Arbor, as well as our kind of second largest city, Ypsilanti. So we went to Ypsilanti Housing Commission's new Park Ridge site, where we talked again about supportive and affordable housing for families and the differences kind of between the sites that are in Ann Arbor versus the sites that are in Ypsilanti, and where folks are, housed, and then what their options are for kind of future if they want to move on from supportive or affordable housing. And then we ended the day wrapped up at the same place that we had started. So kind of costs for the tour, I wanted to just be realistic about what it cost. Our bus rental was about $700. We actually think we could have gotten it in kind or discounted even more because the bus company actually, the owner of the bus company is on the shelters board. But we were kind of trying to make sure to do this as quickly as possible and just kind of went with the options as we had them. So it was $700 for the bus driver and the bus itself. We just did light refreshments on the bus of water and snacks. It was definitely, somewhat time intensive to plan. So I would say between my staff, myself, my staff, and the service provider partners, but we made it pretty easy for the service provider partners to participate without, too much extra time needed on their end to participate. And then lastly, materials. So we provided each elected official with a folder with a little bit of information about the homeless system of care, who does what in the system of care. And then also we allowed the agencies to each provide, who are participating in the tour, to each provide kind of like a brochure or information sheet that they could put in the folders. And we, gave those folders to them at the beginning of the bus tour so that they could look over them during the bus ride to the first stop. So pretty low budget, like I said, half day tour, didn't have to provide too much. And I'm pleased to say that everybody stayed the whole time during, for those 5 or so hours of the tour. I also made sure to prepare our service provider partners. So we found a tour time that worked for everyone and then offered it to elected officials. This was, trying to coordinate, 10 or so service providers and different schedules and whatnot. And so we ended up doing this on a Friday morning in March that worked well for our providers. And again, we actually had to turn away one of our Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners members because we had reached quorum for the board and didn't want to violate any Open Meetings Act. So we had really good participation and we were really pleased with the participation from elected officials. It seemed to work well. We created a schedule of kind of like the meeting points and kind of what I showed you on that last, 2 slides ago. And then I provided talking points to providers a few days in advance. So just very basic, the homeless system of care is coordinated and partnership driven. We are facing a real crisis now, and, destabilization of the system of care has been most harmful to the people we serve. Housing ends homelessness. We are implementing effective programs, look to the housing experts. These are kind of like just the basic points that we were providing to our partners, but really told them to lean into, typically we want to put our best foot forward when we're meeting with an elected official, but we wanted to really be reasonable and say, like, we're in sort of a crisis right now. And we wanted to really lean into that and really talk about that and be very candid. And we did have really wonderful, candid conversations, some hard conversations around like some of the funding decisions that previous, boards or partners had made, and how that, destabilized partner agencies. And then that, then they had to cancel programs as a result of that, and what that meant for the participants of those programs. And really, tried to kind of prepare our providers to be able to do that. And we also, at the end of the tour, provided elected official contact information for all the providers so that they could follow up. And many of them have since invited them to their events, invited them for a private tour of their shelter or, other sites, their food pantry, whatever it might be. And, just wanted to make sure that the providers were gaining something from this by connection, really connection to those elected officials. So the next couple slides are really just wanted to provide some observations. The first one here is just that the informal conversations were just as valuable as the formal ones during the tour. So on the bus on the right-hand side, you'll see here we are on the bus, and I'm talking a little bit about, who knows what at that point. In the hallways, we had great conversations. They were observing things this was on the left side, the shelter that we were visiting. They were looking at a room. They were asking questions about, how many people to a room? What does that look like? And where do they go during the day? And how are they supported? And where do they do laundry? Where do they shower? All of these different things. Just, for officials to see programs and participants and meet participants and meet the workers that are doing the work day in and day out, helping folks, is really meaningful and impactful. And those conversations kind of on the side or in the bus were really great. We had wonderful conversations about what does it mean for somebody to pay 30% of their income for a voucher? How do they get a voucher? How do they sign up for that? What are the issues with affordable housing sites that aren't mission driven owned, that they're privately owned? What does that mean for tenants? And what happens when rents increase? And just really great conversations that happened on the board or on the bus or, kind of on the side. The other, another observation is that we got to show them, here is a picture of showing them a vacant permanent supportive housing unit that was going to be turned over at Miller Manor. This was our second stop on the bus tour. And we really got to talk a lot about services. I think there's definitely kind of a lot of education that is needed around what services look like, how are services delivered, what's the best practices, what is housing first? We had a good discussion about that. What does it mean when you have to exit a client from a program? Where do they go? How do we help them and support them through that process? How does supportive housing fit within the continuum of care of beds and services and units? What happens and how do we help people move on from these programs into more self-sufficiency? On the left side and the right side, you'll see a picture. This is actually, all three of these are at Miller Manor when we were there again. And we got to see the health clinic that's on site. So services that are provided on site. We showed our elected officials what a harm reduction kit looks like and how the staff member that's right in the middle there from Avalon talked about how a harm reduction kit saved a client's life, and how they then had the conversation about substance use and substance use treatment, and really, how that opened the door for someone to obtain services. And so had really great conversations. I think it was a little uncomfortable for some of our elected officials, but it was really great conversation. And I think that's what this bus tour was really all about, was really having those conversations, sharing kind of the struggles that people experiencing homelessness go through, how they need support, who they look to for that support, how, we can be that support, and the results from, a good operating program. And then this is when we visited Creekside Court, the community center. This is all the different service providers there that are talking about family homelessness. One of the observations that I'll share from this is just plan for the unexpected. So someone showed up late at the start of the bus tour. And so we kind of were 15 minutes late to everything after that. But I had kind of built in some buffer time through our process. It was still a really tight timeline. I still don't think we necessarily got as much out of this site discussion that I wanted to, because we were kind of cut short on time. It was still really robust conversation, but we could have allowed for more time because we had more partners at this site. And so that's something to just keep in mind. It was also, if you look on the right-hand side, it was during a snowstorm. We got about 6 inches of snow that morning, and almost, like a bunch of, I think Ypsi City schools were closed that day. And so the person who was late was trying to figure out, what to do for childcare for their child because of the schools closing. So just some unexpected things that you just kind of need to plan for, buffer for, and know that, you have a great timeline. Everybody wants to stick to it, but sometimes people talk a little bit longer than they need to, or want to. And so, being able to also just make sure that, there is someone that is the timekeeper, and that was myself. And I was, trying to keep everyone kind of moving along so that we could see every site. And then also just kind of like being realistic, you can't cover everything in a tour. And so this is sort of like an entree to continue the engagement. And so, next time, we might focus another tour for these same elected officials. We're thinking about highlighting special populations like youth and domestic violence survivors and veterans, and maybe, having a tour of other sites where they can see specifically services for those, but kind of making sure that this is kind of the initial introduction. Maybe it's not even the initial introduction. We've had lots of conversations. A lot of these elected officials were at a homeless awareness event that we had in November. But, making sure that this is an engaging opportunity for them so that, they'll come back for more later on and continue the dialogue. I had a city council member who was on this tour, call me recently around budget issues that they were trying to talk through. And so it's just really an opportunity to help them see you as a resource and an educated partner in this work. So lastly, just wanted to kind of quickly highlight results since the bus tour. We weren't necessarily expecting some of the results that we did kind of more immediately get. So our Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners, right after our March board meeting or March tour, bus tour, they had a board meeting, and several of the Board of Commissioners members who attended the bus tour talked in length during their commissioner comments about the bus tour and the impact that it had, just being able to see and hear from service providers and see participants at shelter and supportive housing sites. And so the County Board of Commissioners approved about $3 million to address housing and homelessness at its April board meeting. It's important to know that some of those dollars are not going to what I would consider housing and homeless service providers, but they're going to like the larger net of human services providers. And so we're really excited about that, because it's kind of making up for some of the decisions that were made 2 years prior or so that sort of like dismantled some of the local funding that we were relying on the homeless system of care. So they're really restoring and adding to the resources that are needed. And then also for the Ann Arbor City Council, they had $1 million in marijuana tax revenue that the city administrator had kind of set aside and said, council members, what are your priorities? How do you want to use these dollars? And so They just adopted their budget last month, and pretty much all of the funding went to housing and homelessness, which we are super thrilled about. So 250,000 is going for eviction prevention, 250,000 for youth services that are attached to housing, 100,000 for the Shelter Association, where we visited that first stop, and then 400,000 for services for housing choice voucher tenants who were formerly involved in the criminal legal system. So really impactful, really exciting kind of to see kind of more immediate, I guess, than I anticipated reaction to the tour and, action. I think, so I think that's about it. That's all I had. I'm happy to take some questions and provide any other feedback. Like I said at the beginning, we're really talking about providing this tour to others in the community. And I think that is really, would be really beneficial. Funders, COC board members of my organization. I'm definitely thinking about doing a tour like that for them. So I'll just put my contact information up, but I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. First of all, kudos. When I read about this, I thought it was amazing. It's even more amazing now that I hear about it. And I have about 140 questions, but I'll ask, well, first of all, it's all about relationship building, right? So this was, a great way. And having been part of a tour myself, I know that if you can have everybody together on a bus where they're having those conversations, you're able to, deliver content while you're traveling and keep everybody together. It's way more, impactful if you can do that. So that's a great idea. Amy asked in the chat, how long did it take you to plan this?
Yeah, so we had the idea like 6 weeks prior to when we did it. So we kind of scheduled it out a month with the elected officials. If I, certainly earlier would be better, but we wanted to get it done in the kind of the first quarter of the new year.
Right. Great. And Erin has a question. Erin?
Yes, thank you for acknowledging me. This sounds like a wonderful idea. I do have a question about who you extended the invitations to when you contacted City Council and the Board of Commissioners. Did you seek out people that you already thought were advocates for housing, or did you go the opposite way and look for those who maybe needed a little more education, maybe a little more information to become perhaps advocates? Which one did you do?
Yeah, we did both. So we offered it to all County Board of Commissioners, all Ann Arbor City Council members, and all Ypsi City Council members. And I would say we had a good mixture of both. I think those who are like more skeptics around like, oh, do you really need more resources to do this work? And what are you doing? To, more who are, get it and are supportive of the cause. But it was, definitely a mixture of both. And I would say I don't know that we, for the folks that we might have had on the tour who were more of the skeptic side or needed a little bit more convincing, I don't know though that we totally convinced them and have turned them into a homelessness and affordable housing advocate, but we definitely educated them. And that was the point of the tour, was really educating them about, the system of care. We get questions all the time about well, aren't there a lot of agencies that do this work? And, and so really trying to help them understand different parts of the system and how, someone might be in shelter, but might be helped with rapid rehousing to get out of that shelter. So it's a good exit for the shelter, but a good, option for the participant. And then, rapid rehousing, maybe then they get a housing choice voucher later on. And so how does that work? And so just, taking it as an education approach to everybody who was there was really important for us and kind of the number one piece that we wanted to provide for the tour.
Great. Eric, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted.
No, I was going to relay the question that you did about we had how much advance time.
Yeah, and I just really, impressed by, I know a lot of the partners in Ann Arbor, and, you had your health partner, you had food gatherers, you had shelter, rapid rehousing, your housing commission, permanent supportive housing, service partners, really very impressive for just, how tight the schedule was. So just wondering also, you talked about some other plans. Any plans for your legislators, your state senators or reps?
Yes, yeah. So we did get that question from a few of our council members that were either our staff members, of state legislators, or just interested in having our state legislators also get this information. So similarly, thinking about, how do we arrange for another tour and maybe focus it, more so on our state legislators. We'll be offering the tour again to the same group pretty soon. So the same, Board of Commissioners, IPSI Council, Ann Arbor Council. We learned this is a good, thing to maybe ask if you have one city council member or that you might be close with. We learned that we had scheduled ours for the Friday after an Ann Arbor City Council meeting that was on Monday. And we learned from one of the council members, for example, that if the council members are planning to go out of town, that's when they do it, right after a city council meeting. And so next time we know, to not plan for it, plan for it for the Friday before the city council meeting that happens on Monday. But those were, some of just the kind of things that we learned, and definitely, want to do the tour as much as we, possibly can. So,
yeah, great ideas. And also great idea for Homeless Awareness Month as well, for people thinking, but also this summer when some of the legislators are in district, there's not as much action in Lansing. Maybe not this year, but we'll see. But yeah, great. Just so impressive and great return on your time. Yeah. So thank you so much. And I'm sure people will be following up with you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll put my info in the chat too. So.
Great. All right. And Eric, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And again, thank you, Amanda, for sharing that. We've seen how that does work at the state level. We did host a sleep out event as part of Homeless Awareness Month 1 year, and had state legislators participate in it, and know that value of people being there firsthand and engaging with folks. So very excited to see the impact that you had as a result of that, and would love to see that replicated elsewhere. So thank you for leading the charge, as always. Well, I'm going to dig into some federal updates. I'm going to limit it a little bit, not to cover too much ground here today, but I think first and foremost, I do want to talk about the debt ceiling agreement. Anybody who has paid attention to what's going on in the news over the last month or so, 2 months, realized that there was going to be a clash taking place as we were set to have the debt ceiling hit us in a possible shutdown. With respect to the showdown that did take place, I wouldn't say that either party blinked necessarily, but the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the President did negotiate an agreement. As most of you know, it's also passed the House and the Senate. It will, amongst other things, be freezing spending on important domestic programs for a 2-year period. That's really the good news, that we're only talking about this being a 2-year window, but we are concerned about what that impact is, of course. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the other elements that's really important is the increased work requirements for certain food and cash assistance programs. It is elevating that age from age 49 to age 54, which is a compromise from what was originally being proposed through the Speaker's office. What we really need to keep in mind here is when we talk about freezing the budget level, it's really a net negative for us. Most folks don't think of it in those terms, but we do know that because there are some key HUD programs that require additional funding every year to keep up with inflation, higher rents, interest rate hikes, etc. A debt ceiling agreement acts as a significant cut in the long run to the affordable housing and homelessness programs, largely within HUD. So we will be seeing some potential competition for funds and need to put our foot on the gas with respect to, again, elevating housing and homelessness as priorities in the upcoming year. So when we think in terms of HUD and what kind of funding they need from year to year, in 2024 alone, we know that there's an estimate of about $13 to $16 billion with a B, in additional funding that would be needed just to maintain the current levels of assistance. So it's a pretty significant amount, unless we can rally troops and see to it that funds do get earmarked specifically to help cover that gap. We're going to see some real significant cuts to programming for services to the folks that we all are supporting here and trying to keep safe. And so we're talking about tens of thousands of people across the country, and of course that translates into a percentage here in the state. But some other debt ceiling components I wanted to touch on real quickly include the fact that it would also release unobligated COVID-19 relief resources. So there have been some dollars that had not been actually obligated yet and have been kind of sitting out there and getting repurposed along the way. Some of you probably have been aware of that. Those dollars would go away. So the opportunity to repurpose and to utilize those for the populations that we serve would be gone. The age limit, as I mentioned, would be going from 49 to 54 for eligibility for food assistance programs, and that would be recipients without children. So they would have to meet certain work reporting requirements. However, in the negotiations, veterans and people experiencing homelessness and some others would be exempted from those time limits. So that is the good news. But it was negotiated that it would be time limited. So it would sunset until 2030. So we would see a reprieve, if you will, with respect to those work requirements up until 2030. Let's see. Oh, and as part of that, the work requirements, when we think in terms of that at the federal level, it would also make it more difficult for states to be able to meet work participation rules as well. So it does put a burden on states along the way. Let's see. Also, just wanted to have everybody keep in mind that when we talk about cuts impacting the programming and services provided through HUD and other federal programs, that we know there's a disproportionate impact on women and on families, LGBTQ people. We understand that those are folks who are often most at risk. And so I do have some information I'm going to be passing along to you as well. I'll drop something into the chat so that you can actually look at a two-pager that was put together in conjunction with the National Women's Law Center and the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which does kind of spell out what those impacts might be specific to those populations. And I think those are the targets when we're talking about this with members of Congress. We really want to key in on those populations as those who are really most at risk, who really do need to have the additional supports and some targeted funding going forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to shift gears here and just talk about something relatively quickly with respect to an opportunity that you all have for weighing in on an issue that relates to how we are addressing the issue of access for folks. The Federal Housing Finance Agency is looking for input from folks. It is time limited. They're looking for input by June 31st, which isn't a huge amount of time. But just as background, the FHFA is an independent federal agency, has a role as a regulator. It oversees Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Banks. It's completely separate from the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, for those of you who might be mixing those two up. The FHA largely provides mortgage insurance, but this is the entity that is, in essence, providing or is the federal backing for mortgages through those institutions that I did mention. And you could weigh in on how the agency can create and enforce renter protections. So it's really important for us when we think about the opportunity here for households that are living in rental properties with federally backed mortgages, that you can, you as an individual and your agency can provide public comment, and I'll have information available to you, a link where you can go to a page to provide public comment, but also if your organization wants to sign on to a national support letter, you also will have that opportunity. And I wanted to key in on a couple of things. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thinking in terms of some of the top priorities, and this is through some of the work done by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. But when we think about federal renter protections, of course, we're doing some stuff here in the state of Michigan. Lisa's going to be talking about the good work that she's been doing here. But so there is a little bit of overlap. But when we think about federal level protections, they're a little bit more comprehensive than some that we're talking about here at the state level. But we're looking at trying to reduce discrimination against households that are receiving housing assistance. We are also, excuse me just a moment here, we're looking at priorities that are focusing on just cause eviction standards, anti-rent gouging protections that we all have heard more and more about over the last couple of years, and then also requirements to ensure housing is safe, decent, accessible, and healthy for renters, which I think is kind of a common sense thing, but there are no formal standards and enforcement taking place in those areas typically. Next slide, please. So those were the top priorities, but at a minimum, thinking in terms of informed renter protections, informed through continued engagement with renters and directly impacted people. So nothing about me without me kind of philosophy. If indeed you're going to be developing policies and regulations, that you make sure you're interacting with people who are directly impacted to get their input on it. Also thinking in terms of focusing on racial and social equity as an explicit goal, thinking in terms of mandatory for all landlords and all rental properties. So it's not excluding certain types of ownership or certain types of housing or sizes of rental properties, but trying to be inclusive in nature, but then also pairing it with strong enforcement. And we often find that that is a failing when we think about federal programming, is that you can put a lot of things on the book, but if you're not actively engaged in enforcement, they don't really matter. And so want to make sure that there really is something significant attached to that to make sure that indeed, if you set the standards, that they are enforced. Okay. I'm going to shift gears here and just remind people about the annual National Alliance to End Homelessness Capitol Hill Day events taking place Wednesday, July 19th. I may or may not have mentioned this at the last meeting, that the registration for the conference opened up and was closed, I think, within 2 days. It was very, very quick. Now that they're back to an in-person, it filled up very quickly. But I do want to let people know that Lisa's going to be going as a state partner and helping with some of those visits and coordinating. So anybody that is registered for NAEH, if you are interested in going on the Capitol Hill Day visits, please sign up for that and plan on working with Lisa on it. But I'm also going to be tossing down the gauntlet, folks, and suggesting that if you really want to get involved, you don't have to go to the whole conference. I myself am not able to do that, but I am going to be doing an in and out. I have to be there really to interact with folks. So I'm going to be doing a red eye 6 o'clock flight in and a 10 o'clock flight out. Anybody that wants to join me, please do so. It's less than $350 for direct flights. So it's going to be a great day. Anybody that wants to do that, come and join Lisa and myself and a bunch of other folks who are going to be participating in engaging. And again, as we talked about here with the appropriations and the upcoming fiscal year budget being worked on, we really do need to have the messaging and talking with people directly on Capitol Hill. So I really encourage you to think about it and let me know if you want me to cajole you into doing it. I'm happy to poke you with a stick periodically if that's what you think you need. Okay, do we have just another slide there? Just want to remind people, again, there's a lot of information on the National Low Income Housing Coalition's Action Center webpage. I've shared this before. I'm doing it again, just so you know there are a lot of opportunities for you throughout the month. You don't have to wait for us to remind you about that. and we'll drop information in the chat box for you to take a look at your leisure. And I think I may have covered it all. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa now, who's going to lead us down the path of the righteous.
Thanks, Eric. I also wanted to comment that Courtney Cooperman from National Low Income Housing Coalition, one of our partners and our regional liaison, put in the chat that National Low Income Housing Coalition is starting a renter protection work group, and it is actually starting tomorrow, and I believe it's going to be meeting weekly at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays, and there is a link to sign up, and they do amazing work, and I know it's going to be a super, on Wednesdays, thank you, sorry, my bad, Wednesdays at 4. Tomorrow's our state partner call. So Wednesdays at 4, and a lot, you just learn so much from the other communities about what they're doing. So I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on in Michigan very quickly. Our source of income protections bills, we have 5 of them right there. The Senate held a Housing Committee hearing and heard testimony on the bills on May 16th. Many of us on this call participated in that, either virtually or in person, and it was great. We had several tenants and a landlord come and give testimony. We understand that tentatively the Senate committee is looking at voting next week, which would be the 13th. That's tentative right now, and we will definitely let you know if that happens so that you can pack the room and join on Zoom and put your support in. So the link there is for our sign-on letter that we are still hoping people will register for, so that we can demonstrate how many people are in favor of this protection. So you can go to the next slide, please. There's a lot of other things going on. As you know, the Michigan fiscal year budget is being finalized. We sent out an advocacy alert about 2 weeks ago that there was a placeholder in there in the DHHS portion of the budget for $13 million in supportive services for supportive housing, which we are super excited about. And if you have an opportunity to just weigh in and advocate for that, staying in the budget when the House and the Senate, come together and kind of hash out the final version, that would be amazing. Also, a couple things just to let you know about Senate Bill 128. That's the tax credit for both food programs and shelters that passed the Senate and is being referred to the House committee. And they're kind of getting some language together about what kind of the definition of shelters for the food programs. It's funding that comes from an accredited, food program. Shelters, they're looking for a little bit more than just you say you're a shelter. So they're kind of sharpening their pencil on that. So we're waiting to hear more about that. House Bill 4273 is just one I haven't mentioned in the past, but we just want to put on your radar about amending the Housing Act that would include tenant notification of code violations. For example, if there's a city code and they slap a big sticker on the door so that tenants are also notified if in fact they're living in rental housing that isn't, up to code. That's important because sometimes tenants have been the last to know. So that's been introduced. And then there's a package of youth bills that have to do with foster care notification, emergency notification, and treatment. And those are introduced in the House right now, and they are working through getting hearings on that. But we are supporting that, and we can send some more information out to you about how to provide support as well. Next slide. And thanks, Amy. Oh, I'm off the thing there. Okay, so additional considerations, just around all of the work that we want to do this year on tenant protections. There's a very slim majority in both chambers in our legislature right now. I think it's 20 to 18 in the Senate and, slim in the House. So we want to just really, your advocacy is super important to talk with your legislators in June, they have a solid month of work still this month, and then only a couple days of session in July and August. So we really want to make sure that, we can get as much done as we can. There's a lot of conversation around other protections as well as just cause legislation, and talk about right to counsel statewide. Thank you. There we go. There's also rental fees that may be legislation around limiting some of those application fees there. That's perfect. There's a lot of new members in more in the House and in the Senate, but a lot of new staff as well. And so, that's really a call for advocacy on your part to educate them, let them know what, kind of like what Amanda was talking about, what are the impacts that you're feeling in your local community based on some of the, funding and some of the legislation. Also, Legislative Services Bureau, which is where they request the bill language and any research, lost a lot of longtime staff. So there's a backlog of information that's, been requested and waiting to come back. So that impacts as well as the potential for a short legislative session this year. Many of you may know that there's been a proposal that the Michigan primary would be in February next year. So there has to be 90 days between the end of the legislative session and the primary. So could be a short session. So that just lets us know that we really have to work hard over the summer and into the fall to really work as partners with our legislators. Next slide.
Lisa, I just had a quick question. I know we're short on time, but was that staffing loss at the Legislative Service Bureau, like any reason, like a lot of retirement, or was the department restructured? Or
no, I heard it was retirement. People
okay.
Long-time staff had left.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious.
So
thanks.
Lost a lot of historical knowledge there. Yeah, expertise. Next slide. Thank you. So just some ideas during this summer for legislative engagement. You heard about the amazing work in Washtenaw, a tour that they did of housing and shelter and agencies. You could host an open house at your organization. You could, invite legislators and county commissioners and elected officials on a roundtable or forum. Could be on housing. You could have a landlord event. Landlord breakfasts are very popular. You could also attend coffee hours of your state senator or House rep. If you sign up for their newsletter, you can see when they are going to be hosting them. You can also look on their webpage, and also attend an event is a great thing to do to, kind of gain information about what the rental market looks like, what are the challenges, what are the gaps, and then you can also relay those to your legislators and elected officials. Next slide. So what can you do? How can your voice be heard this summer, and what can you do? So make plans for legislative outreach. Stay tuned to our newsletter, action alerts. We'll be sending some things out on the upcoming hearings for the source of income legislation. You can also sign on to our support letter for source of income protections, as well as sign up for the National Low Income Housing Coalition, renter work group. Anything that anybody wants to talk about? I know you represent a lot of the state. I know we've got some great partners. Anything that's going on in your local area that you want to talk about, let us know about. Anna.
Hi, everyone. Well, as a lot of you guys know, I receive a housing choice voucher through Grand Rapids Housing Commission. So something I didn't even know, and they were not, I don't know why they're not letting tenants know, but they increased our voucher amount June 1st by, well, mine's $160 a month. So as I'm looking for a new place, that would have been a really good knowledge. Oh, and there's a sign-on bonus for landlords. But it would have obviously been really good knowledge to already have had, because I've lost opportunities. And I have to move in, less than 2 weeks. But just something to be aware of, because unless you went to the board of commissioners meeting, or you got something because you are a landlord and not every landlord even received it, are the only people who have been told this. So I had to wait. Actually, my worker just called while we were on the call. I got to call her back. She had to make new papers for me.
Wow.
But just an FYI for anyone on the call that's local or just in general, just it's good knowledge to know. I'm not sure why that's not being told to the tenants who have to find their own places, but that makes a huge, huge difference between finding a place. So I just wanted to share that because I think it's important.
Definitely. And so good for partners on the call to be in contact with your, housing commissions, public housing authorities, so that you're in the loop and can share this information with tenants and renters. Definitely tenants.
And their website does have the updated, like at least per bedroom rates. The market, yeah. And then the utility schedule stays the same, she said.
Okay. Thank you, Anna.
You're welcome.
And good luck with that housing search. What about other folks? Anything else going on around the mitten? All right. Well, we'll go ahead and give you some updates that we have. Amy?
Sure. I will drop a link in the chat and it'll also go out in the newsletter, but we have about 60 people registered for our upcoming in-person Breakfast of Champions. We have some great folks that we're honoring across a couple different categories, and we hope you can join us. There'll be breakfast. We have videos of the winners. We have videos of the folks who nominated them and why, and then also giving them time on the podium and the spotlight to talk a little bit about their work, not to mention breakfast and just fellowship. So we hope you can make it. There'll be links on our have been links on our social media platforms, newsletters, and I'll drop it in the chat as well. But we hope you can come. And I just want to stress it's in Livonia. So some of you hopefully won't have to drive as far since it's in the Metro Detroit area. The other piece I wanted to plug is this is a little screenshot of our monthly newsletter, but the upcoming class we have now is in June is a little different. It's not housing related, but more social media agency training. This is, I think, Communications Month or something. So Allison Green asked me to do something based on social media, marketing, messaging. We have over 50 people signed up for that as well. But if you go to our training blog, all the registration is there, and I'll drop that in the chat in our newsletter as well. But we hope you can join. You can know next to nothing about social media and messaging up to you could be the dedicated, director of communications. And it's just kind of a conversation and working session about what is your messaging plan, marketing plan, how does social media work? So I'm excited for it. And if you know of someone that could benefit from it and contribute even, I'd love to have them join. And I went fast because I know we're short on time, Lisa, so I'll send it back to you.
I'm not going to talk about this slide. This is our policy priorities, but I did want to just say that, we have some great champions that are being recognized. The advocacy champion this year is Janessa Doolittle from Oakland County Health Department. So we have, it's a different kind of partner, and it's a wonderful kind of role and partnership to highlight as our advocacy champion. Ryan Hannon won for the data champion, I believe. So really exciting, and I hope you're able to join us, and we're recognizing some great work that we know is going on every day out there. So next slide, please. Thanks for being with us. Just some shameless plugs about joining Micah as a member, as we always do. We appreciate all you and all your partnership. Amy's going to share some great stuff about how she accomplishes all of our communication plans, which is a lot of different platforms. And finally, we'll wrap up and just say thank you. And we'll see you in this and many other spaces this month. And thank you for your attendance. And we look forward to working with you. Thanks, everyone.